Hey everybody, welcome. It's Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles. This is another episode in our series that we're calling What Happened and What Comes Next. And today we're joined by an old and dear friend, Ken Martin, who's the chair of the Minnesota Democratic Party, very successful chair, also the chair of the Association of Democratic State Committees, the state parties, who's having a big meeting this week in Arizona. Ken is also a leading candidate to be the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and so I'm really grateful he's able to spend a little bit of time with us today, so you can get to know him a little bit better and hear his views. And Ken, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Simon, for having me. I really want to thank you and all of the Hopium community for their work this past year, all throughout the country. I mean, the work you did in North Carolina, Wisconsin, even Nebraska was so important, obviously. The money that you guys raised, the support that you provided throughout the states. I just really wanted to say thank you. You know, when we talk about this work, it takes all of us. And, you know, while it didn't work out exactly how we wanted, there were great wins up and down the ballot, as you've been talking about since this election. And we have to focus on some of the silver linings that came out of this election while also figuring out what happened. So thank you. And thank you to all your listeners.
Yeah, and Ken, you've been great about talking about how, we did lose the presidential, but it was very close, and we did have a lot of important wins across the country. And so we have to be balanced in our understanding as we all try to figure out what happened and what comes next.
No,
You've done,
that's
I think you've been doing a great job in creating finding the right balance in that.
Well, Simon, you and I have talked about this for over many years. You know,
Yeah.
we have a tendency in campaigns and elections, when you lose elections, of course, everyone wants to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Everything was wrong. Nothing was great, right? And, you know, and the opposite is true too. When you win elections, everyone was a genius. There were no mistakes made, right? You know, you and I have worked enough in this business and in campaigns and elections to know that in every election, there's things we do well that we should continue to build upon. And there's things that were failures that we should never do again. And, you know, I'm not interested in winning the argument. I'm actually interested in winning elections again. And part of that is doing what you're doing, which is being really intentional about not having hot takes here, but really digging into the data and letting the data and research guide our path back, right? We know, for instance, we lost ground with Latino men. We know that we lost ground with working class households. We know that we lost ground with white women. We know all that to be true, right? What we don't know is the how and why. And it's going to take us time to figure those pieces out. That's why I appreciate you and others out there just sort of taking the time to pause, really reflect on the data we have at our fingertips right now, and it just not have a knee-jerk reaction. There's so many hot takes out there right now, and most of them seem to be meant to serve that particular person's own agenda. And so I'm not looking to be overly critical right now until we have the data and we can actually then start prescribing the solution for what our ailments are.
Amen, brother. I'm calling it half-baked hot takes are all over the map now, and we just need to be respectful of one another, to
Yeah.
learn together, and to be deliberate. I mean, this is important stuff. We got to be smart about how we do it. Tell us a little bit more about you and your background, your history, your successes in Minnesota. I think people would like to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, Simon, I'm not a household name for sure. I've been around in Democratic politics. You and I have
Yep.
known each other a long time. I started in the early 90s working for my hero and mentor, Paul Wellstone, and then worked various campaigns throughout the country in Kansas, where I went to school, and worked for the Kansas Democratic Party, then came back home to Minnesota, working campaigns and elections up and down the ballot, including running Senator Kerry's campaign here in Minnesota in 2004, Vice President Gore's campaign in 2000, various gubernatorial, Senate, congressional campaigns, you name it. And in 2010, and this is, I think, really critical, I helped get a Democratic governor elected in Minnesota for the very first time in 24 years. We won a governorship, right? And people look at Minnesota, they think it's a very blue state, but it's not. It was a very purple state, electing, you know, Republicans to the U.S. Senate, a number of Republicans to Congress, and of course, Republicans statewide for years. And so in 2010, when I got a Democratic governor elected, his name's Mark Dayton, and he said, "Look, I want to visit with you about a job." And I remember going home to my wife and saying, "This is it. I'm going to get a job in the administration." And I went to Mark the next day, and he said, "I want you to be the party chair." And I said, "Are you kidding me? Is this some sort of punishment?" And you know, I agreed to do it. for what I thought would be 2 years, and now that was 14 years ago. But was critical in that election in 2010. It was one of the worst elections in 50 years for the Minnesota DFL. We lost a 40-year majority in the state Senate. We lost our state House majority. The Republicans, for the first time in 50 years, had both control of both chambers, and we lost the longest held Democratic seat in Congress in the 8th Congressional District, among many others. And so I was happy to come in and actually rebuild the party. Little did I know when I came in, Simon, that our party had, $725,000 in debt. We had $150,000 federal election committee fine hanging over my head. And it was a real turnaround job to rebuild our party and get them focused. And so what I did right away is get all of our stakeholders, donors, right? Our stakeholder groups on the outside, our partners in labor, partners in environmental groups, our choice partners, everyone else, as well as our party leaders and activists and elected officials and candidates into the room. And we said, look, we have to, if we're going to get back into power, we have to come together in a meaningful way. And we have to do this together. And I built a plan. In my slogan here has always been, it's my slogan for the DNC campaign, build to win, build to last. It's a very simple premise, which is, what is the role of a political party? One, and most important, is to win. But we have to build to win, build to last. We have to build permanent, durable political infrastructure that allows us to win, of course, but do it in a way that we're not recreating the wheel every 2 years. And that's what we've done in Minnesota. And as a result, coming out of that, not only have I not lost a statewide election, we picked up our first trifecta in over 34 years. And then we picked up our second trifecta just 2 years ago, right? And arguably passed one of the most successful packages of legislative policy in our country's history to improve people's lives, right? And so, I just think it's important that, folks need to remember there's a lot of good work going on around this country for sure. But I think Minnesota serves as a model of how you build infrastructure to not only win up and down the ballot, but then to elect people who are going to use the power they have when they have it to make the biggest difference for as many people as they can. And I'm proud of Governor Walz. I'm proud of Speaker Hortman and Leader Dietzick and the work that they did. And I'm certainly proud of our party in getting them there.
Ken, can you talk a little bit more about the trifecta? And what you mean by that is you won the governorship, the House, and the Senate, so you had legislative control. And then all of you together, then passed this very progressive agenda, which was really propelled Governor Walz into national stardom and really was one of the central reasons that he was able to join the ticket. Can you just go through a little bit about what you actually did with the power that you accrued during the trifecta?
I think, just take a step back for a second. Wellstone used to say that, politics is not about big money or special interest. Politics is squarely about the improvement of people's lives. That ethos, of we all do better when we all do better, or in Tim Walz's case, One Minnesota, the idea that everyone matters and no one should be left behind in this conversation really contributed to us when we came back into power in the trifecta after the 22 election. The ethos for everyone was this: we cannot sit on political power. What good is banking political power if you don't use it to make a bit difference in people's lives? What are you doing in office, right? And for me, that was probably one of the most proud moments for me as a Democrat, is seeing people, instead of looking through the lens of how do I get reelected? What's the political calculus here? No, let's put an agenda together that centers the struggles of everyday working Minnesotans and actually deliver on that, right? And we'll win because of that. And that's true, right? If you govern the right way to help make a difference in people's lives, it's also a winning strategy. But Governor Walz, of course, led that along with our speakers, Speaker Melissa Hortman and our Senate leader, Carrie Dietzick, really came in and they put a great agenda together. Everything from passing paid family and medical leave to earning sick safe time to reducing childcare costs to free school lunches for children, right? The largest child tax credit in the nation. You can go down the list. The list is so long of the things that were accomplished to actually help people who were struggling to get by just feel like they could get ahead. And Minnesota led the way there, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why Governor Walz was, Governor Walz was sort of like me. If I remember saying to folks as I was traveling around the country this the last few months of the election, I asked people, raise your hand. How many of you knew who the Minnesota governor was a couple months ago? No one knew who Tim Walz was, right? And no one knows who the hell I am, and that's okay, right? I mean, I think in Minnesota we just we don't toot our own horns. We do good work, and then we just let the work speak for itself. And I'm really proud of Tim. I'm devastated for our country because they missed out on two great public servants in Kamala Harris and Tim Walz helping to lead this country.
Talk a little bit about what you want to do as national chair. I mean, you've obviously been doing this now as a successful state chair and also as chair of the chairs, as I call it, the chairman of the Association of Democratic State Committees, as you now call it, the state chairs, the state Democratic parties. What are the key things that you want to do that you think we need to do if you become chairman in a few weeks?
Well, again, we have to wait to see some of that data that we talked about to really get prescriptive on some of the more granular solutions that we need. But let me just say, I think this is an opportunity for us to reimagine the DNC, right? In every sort of crisis moment, there's an opportunity to actually think about what we can do differently here. And this is not a shot on any of the prior administrations, right? But from my perspective, there's just been some glaring omissions of things that we should be doing. And, the first is not backsliding or walking away from the 57 state party strategy. In 2016, in 2017, I should say, I came in as the vice chair of the DNC, as the number two, heading up our state parties. I remember after the 2016 election, you and I talked about this, Simon. Our party was deeply in debt, around 79 million in debt. We were the data infrastructure was way behind the Republicans at the time, and of course, our state parties had been hollowed out in the previous 8 years by OFA and the Obama administration, who completely stripped our party infrastructure bare. And so what we had to do is focus on actually turning around the DNC and our national party. And I'm proud of my role in that, in creating the 57 state strategy, which was actually, taken off of Howard Dean's 50 state strategy. And we put it on steroids. I mean, we did much deeper investments, much deeper partnerships with state and local party committees to make sure that they were prepared to meet the moment. And as a result, our state party infrastructure is stronger than ever before. So the first thing for me is to make sure we actually expand on the 57 state strategy, right? Right now, only about 10% of the DNC's budget goes to state parties. And they're such a big part of our operation. We should be doing more than 10%, significantly more, to help those state parties stand up infrastructure on the ground. So we have to redouble our commitment there. Second is we need a Project 3,244. That's how many counties are in this country, right? And the reality is, unfortunately, Simon, there are many of those counties that don't have any elected Democratic Party leadership or organization in those counties. That's unacceptable to me, right? Because there's Democrats everywhere who want to organize everywhere. And if we believe we can win anywhere, as I do, you need an every zip code strategy where we are not leaving anyone behind or out of the conversation, and we're competing in every zip code. That means we have to start with the basics, making sure we have organization prepared to work with those organizers on the ground. The third thing for me, which is really important, is contesting every race up and down the ballot. I believe, Simon, that one of the big mistakes for many years now by the Democratic Party is they focus way too much on DC. They focus way too much on federal races. Yes, we have to win Congress back. Yes, we have to win the presidency, but it's not an either or in my estimation. We have to do both. We also have to compete all the way down ballot, not just state legislative and statewide races. We have to look at city councils, school boards, county boards, mayoralships, right? Years of indifference on those races had led to this moment now, Simon, where we see the Republicans and the conservative movement in this country has been working so hard to push people for those offices and then enact a very far-right agenda. The school boards are a perfect example of this, and what Moms for Liberty has done, pushing a very dogmatic, terrible agenda that's impacting communities throughout this country. We cannot do that. And the reason we have to compete there is not through a self-interested lens of grooming candidates for higher office. Sure, that's great. But really because we have to win these public policy battles in every public policy arena throughout the country, right? The fifth thing for me, which is really, really important here, is to make sure that we are investing in our future, Simon. And we talk a big game about the youth vote, but we really don't resource organizations that are tasked with organizing organizing and doing youth civic engagement. Groups like the high school Dems, the college Dems, the young Dems, Voters of Tomorrow, other youth civic engagement organizations, we always shortchange them, and then we ask them to turn around and mobilize young voters, and that can't be anymore. And this leads to one of my key points on this is we need a year-round organizing program, right? And I'm not going to take scarcity of resources as an example here, Simon.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We had a little technical glitch. These things happen in the modern age that we all are part of. I think if it doesn't happen, it's almost weirder than if it does. But welcome back, Ken. And listen, you were just talking, you were going through your program for the DNC, and you were talking about young voters, youth voters, which was obviously a big disappointing part of this election. So if you want to just pick it up from there.
Well, as I mentioned, we just need to make sure that we are resourcing those organizations the right way. And part of this to me is actually changing our organizing model at the DNC, right? And within state parties and local parties. We have a very transactional organizing model. We come to communities, whether it's rural communities, young voters, communities of color, other communities throughout the country, 4 to 5 months before an election, of course. And the first conversation we have with many of those voters is transactional. We're asking them for something in return. We're asking them for their vote. And, imagine, by the way, Simon, like in Minnesota, we have year-round organizing programs. Our organizers never stop communicating with voters. We have a full-time coordinated campaign, much like in the neighbor to the east. Ben Wickler has a full-time, year-round organizing program. This is important. That's where the state parties are actually innovating and leading on this. We need the national party to do that as well, which is to understand that we should never go down with communicating with voters, right? Imagine if the first conversation we had with someone was not about politics, not about our party, not about candidates, but more around shared values, around issues, bringing people in to a conversation, listening to them about their hopes and dreams, listening to them about what they want to see in their communities, and then over time, slowly introducing our party, slowly introducing our candidates. And the last conversation we have is asking them to vote for our candidates. It's a much better way to build trust and to build a durable relationship with communities writ large if we're actually invested in the conversation instead of the transaction. So we have to change this. And I'm not going to take scarcity of resource as an answer after we just spent $2.5 billion on a presidential campaign, Simon. We just can't do that. And a couple other things I would say that are important here. One that you've been really good in talking about, and I agree with your assessment completely, which is we have to compete in this 24/7, 365 information environment we live in, right? And we've gotten beaten to the punch by the Republicans here. They spent the last 4 years spreading misinformation and lies in platforms that we're not even on. My boys are 22 and 20. Surprisingly, they get all of their news from TikTok. I'm still old-fashioned this way, Simon. I read a newspaper every day, right? From front cover to the back cover. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but I'm just old-fashioned that way. But I will say this, that we have to understand where people go to get their information. And notice I don't say news. Because see, that's the problem we make. We go to places that are newsmakers or traditional media outlets. People aren't getting their information from those spaces anymore, and we have to do a better job. And the second piece that I think we need to understand is that the Republicans weren't putting politicians or talking heads in those spaces. They were using micro-influencers and people already on those platforms, trusted messengers and validators to actually spread these messages. Really critical for us because we are not there. People ask me all the time because I hunt, where do you go to hunt? And they think I'm going to say, well, to the woods or to my favorite hunting spot. No, you go where the deer are. This is the same thing with voters. Where do we need to go? Well, we need to meet them where they're at and where they're getting their information. Last piece is branding. This is one of the things, my biggest takeaways from this election is this, and you've heard me talk about this, Simon. Last spring, the most glaring sort of canary in the coal mine, which should have been a red flag for all of us in the ecosystem, was research that showed for the first time in modern history, the perceptions of the two political parties has flipped on its head. And the majority of Americans now believe that the Republican Party best represents the interests of the working class and the poor, and Democrats are for the wealthy and the elite. That is a damning indictment on our party, on our brand. And you know this better than anyone, Simon. Perceptions and feelings are really tough to change. It's going to take us time, a lot of time, to figure out what is wrong with our brand so we can reconnect our popular policy prescription, which are passing and ballot initiatives throughout this country, back to these voters in a way that they understand that we are their champion and we're fighting for them again. So just a few ideas of what I would do with the
Yeah.
DNC. There's a lot more to unpack, of course, Simon. I don't want to be Pollyannish about this election, but there is a lot more to unpack, and we'll get to that, of course.
Well, and two just points that I want to put exclamation points on, or that you made. One is this movement from a culture of scarcity to one of abundance is really critical, because we all grew up in a party of scarcity and we're just not there anymore. And we need to understand that. And it creates opportunity for investment and risk taking that just wasn't available to us before. And it even goes into targeting and how we target, right? Even our targeting strategy is a sort of a legacy from scarcity. We over target, in my view. We over index on narrow groups as opposed to having broad conversations. And I think that this idea of moving from scarcity to abundance, or whatever word we're going to use, is really critical. The second thing I just want to throw out there that I thought was important, that you talked about, was this idea that we need to be organizing all the time. I mean, we know, from having been part of a successful state party, we know what works, right? We know what works in Wisconsin. We know how Georgia got much more democratic, how Arizona got much more democratic. We saw the impact that Anderson Clayton and a real party had in North Carolina. There has been in our family, in part because of scarcity sort of mentality, the Democratic Party has often been, or party institutions have often been, sort of secondary or tertiary places that people gave. And it was not seen as a primary instrument of advancing our politics. And that has to change. And it's important. And it's one of the reasons I was really proud of what we did in the Hopium community, where we did invest in state parties.
Yes.
We were the largest investor in the North Carolina party in the country, and the Nebraska party, and Ben's party in Wisconsin.
Right.
And I think really trying to help our large donors and also our small donors understand the centrality of the role of the party. I mean, there is no other institution like it in our family, and it needs to be punching at the highest possible level. Every part of our family has to be performing at the highest level possible for us to compete. Our party infrastructure's not been there, in part because of a lack of investment by the family. And where we've had investment, we can see real concrete gains. Look at Jane Klebb, right? When she took over, there were 500 elected officials, Democrats in Nebraska. Now there are 900, right? Even though the country has moved a little bit to the right, they've had gains there. These are because we had a real party that had, to your point, both a short-term and a long-term plan. And then finally, Ken, I just want to go back to something that you mentioned, and I know we're going to be out of time here in a minute, but I think that the idea that we have to do a lot of work around, being always on and being always communicating and using all the tools and going to where people are, is really going to be a very important part of the coming debate, I think, that we have inside the family about where we go. Because, we left the barn door open for young people and for Hispanics. I mean, we really got our clocks cleaned here. And it's important, I think, we recognize that the two groups that probably swung the most against us are the two groups that consume social media the most, right? And, in the country. And so we have a lot of learning to do about how people are communicating now and building a politics around that fearlessly and taking risks and getting out of our comfort zones in order to do that. Because I have kids your kids' age. My boys are 24, 22. I have a 19-year-old daughter. I see how they interact with the world, and it is so fundamentally different from us. And so we have a lot of learning to do, and I'm grateful for your plan and that you've laid out here. Any final words? Because I know you've got a very busy week ahead of you. Is there anything you want to get into
First
before
off,
we go?
I'm looking forward to seeing you down in Arizona.
Yeah.
Simon is always very gracious to come on and come out to our meetings and visit with state chairs. And he's on a panel with one of our great friends, Tom Bonnier from Target Smart. And so thank you, Simon. Let me just reflect on something you mentioned about investing in state and local party committees. I just want to share a quick story with you. In 23, I was down in Mississippi with Brandon Presley, who was a candidate for governor there. And I said, and he was polling even with Tate Reeves, the Republican incumbent at the time. And about 2 months before the election, I said, Brandon, what more can the DNC do to be helpful? And he said, look, after years of disinvestment and indifference in southern states by our national party committees, I'm now on the verge of potentially winning this governorship, but I have to build all the infrastructure myself. There's nothing here for me to tap into, right? And you and I both know if we had been looking at Mississippi 10 years before, just on the demographics alone, most number of African-American voters per capita in that state anywhere else in the nation, and we started investing early on, we could have been better prepared to meet that moment and win that governorship. So the point here is you cannot starve state parties or local party committees because they're tasked with building that infrastructure, the infrastructure that candidates and campaigns rely on so they don't have to do everything themselves. And that's the role of all of us, is to make sure we're building infrastructure so we can actually help candidates get elected to office who share our values, so ultimately they can improve people's lives. That's why I do this work. That's why you do this work. And it's really important. And I appreciate you having me on, Simon, as always. Thank you, my friend.
Ken, good luck with everything. And can you just, as we close, can you just lay out for people the process? There's going to be 4 debates and 4 in January and then a vote on February 1st. Is that how this is all going to go down?
Yes, it is. And 4 debates in January. February 1st in Maryland will be 450 delegates, roughly, who will vote on this. All 57 state parties throughout the country and territories who will have a big say here. And it's a big decision, of course, one that will have a lot of consequence on how we actually perform in 25, 26, and beyond.
Ken, good luck with everything. I look forward to seeing you later this week, and maybe we'll have you back during the January crush. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Take care.
Take care.